Welcome to the Irish NFL Show in association with our partner QuinBet. The temperature at this stage of the off-season is now at boiling point, particularly if you've been following the Giants-Lions joint practices where the punches have been flying. And we're going to get to the Lions and the Packers, Vikings and Bears with our special guest, Carmen Vitali. Carmen covers the NFC North for Fox Sports and hosts Fox Sports Saturday on Fox Sports Radio. Carmen, thanks so much for joining us on the Irish NFL Show.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the Lions then, because obviously they're digesting, as are the Giants, those $200,000 fines from the league for the various brawls, inverted commas, at their joint practices. What did you make of all that?
It happens at every training camp that I've ever seen. Maybe not this early, maybe not this often. I think reports coming out of those practices where there were 12 fights that broke out, or scuffles as they call them. This is a passionate group as far as Detroit goes. Dan Campbell is one of the best when it comes to being a leader of men and for getting his guys riled up. It just shows you that these Lions still have a chip on their shoulder despite reaching the NFC Championship game last year. And I'm not surprised. Obviously, you want to minimize fighting because you want to minimize the risk of injury at this stage of the game because it's preseason and that could end somebody's season before it even starts. But at the same time, these guys are ready to go. And I think that very quietly, Dan Campbell is a little proud of his guys.
Yeah, it also kind of made me laugh because I know everybody goes through the motions. Oh, this is terrible, and the league has to find them. But they're also playing in a preseason game, right? So that's going to do no harm to help sell the tickets for that one. Everybody at practice seems to be loving it from the crowd noise. I think probably the only downside if you're Brian Daboll is no Malik Neighbors and Daniel Jones, you don't get involved.
Exactly. You want to keep your star players out of it. Although Malik seems to be the instigator in the videos I've seen, doing a little drive-by of Kirby Joseph. So Kirby Joseph is not one you want to mess with. He's a feisty guy. I've seen him get in fights even in games, or just get in people's faces a little bit like that. He's a talker. So that's not the guy you want to provoke, I don't think. And like I said, Dan Campbell's unit, they're really passionate guys, and they're led by a guy that's a total football tough guy. So they're not the team you want to pick a fight with.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. And obviously Dan Campbell will want to take that into this season because this is an interesting season ahead. I guess it is for all the teams in the NFC North, the way the division is shaping up. But from a Lions perspective, you're not the cuddly, lovable underdogs anymore. There's serious expectation now. The expectation isn't go to the playoffs. The expectation isn't win a playoff game. The expectation is you're all in.
Yeah, it is. And if you could have, I was in the locker room after they lost the NFC Championship game in Santa Clara, and every single one of those guys was so mad. They were so pissed off. They were not grateful to have gotten that far. They were not happy with exceeding the expectations that had been put forth on them after they had finished the season, spiting the Packers out of the playoffs the previous year. Every single guy was expecting to go to the Super Bowl, and seeing the first half of that game, you would have thought that was justified, and to fall apart with one half of football and be so close, one half away from the Super Bowl, something the Lions have never done, and to have it ripped away from you, that's something that Dan Campbell is stressing, I promise you, every single day of this offseason, starting right after the game. These guys were so upset. And they were so mad, and they knew that they had more in them. And that's not a good feeling. So yes, there's expectations on them, but they have the talent to rise to those. And then they have all of the intangibles. This is one of the closest locker rooms that I've ever been able to see. The closest locker rooms I've been in general. They have fun together, and they're with each other, and they have a very singular belief in what they're doing in Detroit and in their coaching staff. That's all the intangibles you need to actually make a Super Bowl run, which is crazy to say about the Detroit Lions as someone who grew up watching this division.
Talent-wise, though, they seem to be there or thereabouts, but they're in that tricky zone where if you stay still in the NFL, you're going backwards, right? So there's this fine line between not meddling too much with a winning formula and also making sure that you're doing enough to put yourself over the top. How do you think they've managed that this offseason? They haven't done anything splashy, but maybe they didn't need to.
No, they pretty much had a really complete roster going into this year. They thought they were going to have enough when it came to their defensive secondary. That has not proven to be the case. And even just today, we find out the news that Emmanuel Mosley has now torn his pec after coming back from not one, but two ACLs. From the coaches that I've talked to over there, that this is just heartbreaking for them because Emmanuel is a guy that is really fun to be around in the locker room. He works so hard, and he was impressing up until his injury in camp, and you really thought that this was going to be his redemption story. But what I really appreciated that Brad Holmes did this offseason, and especially in the draft, is go out and take 2 cornerbacks with their first 2 picks. He made sure that no matter what, this secondary was going to be okay, because injuries are a certainty in this league. And unfortunately, the Lions have been hit with the injury bug, most specifically in that secondary, where that was their downfall in that second half against the 49ers. If there was a critique against this team last year, it was their pass defense, and how that, kind of manifested itself even with their pass rush. When you only have Aiden Hutchinson really disrupting the front, you put a lot of pressure on the front to do that when you don't have anybody in the secondary to really pick up the slack. So now this defense is much more complete. They are so deep when it comes to their secondary after getting Carlton Davis on top of those 2 draft picks. And some of those guys are going to be, in the rotation right away. So I appreciate that they did that. I think they got better in that way. And then they locked up the guys that are cornerstone pieces for them this year when it comes to Penei Sewell, Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You give these contracts and rewarding these guys, a lot of them, 2 of them at least, homegrown between Penei and Amon-Ra. And that, again, gives these guys faith in this organization, knowing that if they play their hearts out for this organization, they will be rewarded. So I liked all of the things that the Lions did, even if they weren't splashy this year. They didn't have very far to go. Like I said, they made it to the NFC Championship last year. They just need to get over the hump, which is easier said than done.
Of course, I've been enjoying watching Amon-Ra on receiver on Netflix, I have to say. His little pre-match routine of running through all the guys that were drafted ahead of him and memorizing all those names. Also his German, I hadn't realized.
Yeah.
He is German. It's all very impressive. But one guy whose name I've been hearing mentioned a little bit this offseason is Jameson Williams, who kind of had been forgotten to a certain extent because of injury and off-field issues. But he's a guy that the Lions seem to be quietly pushing forward as someone who could be a bit of a wild card for them this year.
Yeah, and we've seen this in camp. We saw this in camp last year as well. There are flashes of Jameson Williams where he is so incredibly fast and he can get down the field and he can stretch the field so that you have to defend all levels of it if you're a defense going against these Lions. And especially when you have a coordinator like Ben Johnson, who knows how to make all of these versatile pieces between Amon-Ra, between Jameson, between Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta. He knows how to make all these guys work together and stress the opposing defense. Jameson Williams can go a long way in doing that because of how fast he is. He can be that burner type of guy. We just haven't seen that consistency when it comes to catching the actual football. So you need to see that. And there have been a lot of encouraging reports out of camp that this, he looks good. He's doing everything he's asked to do. He's staying healthy, all of those things. But it really is going to come, you need to get to the season first before you can really say definitively that he is going to be a factor. But that is going to add a different dimension to this offense if they can get him going.
You mentioned, Carmen, the Lions being in the position of basically only having to spite the Packers out of the playoffs to play for it at the end of the year. The Packers, meanwhile, seem to be spiting the rest of the NFL by making a rebuild look as ridiculously easily as it could possibly be. And they've rewarded Jordan Love for his fine performance, particularly over the last half of the season in that playoff win in Dallas, with a contract that you've been very to the front in saying looks like really good value in your view. And given where the salary cap is going and given what it's going to cost to even have an average quarterback, looks like another tidy bit of business by Brighton Gutekunst.
Yeah, if you waited another year on Jordan Love's contract, that contract was going to start with a 6 annually. And that was something that I think he would still be worth, given that's top of the market money. Packers operate in a way that only the Packers can. We've seen them have a track record of doing this between Favre and then Rodgers and now Love. But the dirty little secret of this strategy is that these guys waste 3 years of their rookie deals, and you don't get to take advantage of that. Now, the Packers, instead of taking advantage of a rookie contract for a quarterback and then paying for weapons, do the opposite. And it's worked out so far. They're spending less than 10% of their salary cap on Jordan Love's weapons as far as the offense goes, offensive pieces go. But you can do that. If you do that, that means you can pay Jordan Love now. I don't know that many teams are okay with risking that. It's just that the Packers know that this works. They also don't have an owner, so they don't have certain kind of unique pressures that come from having an owner to play your first round pick right away, for instance, or not let him sit, or, why would you, take a quarterback in the first round and then go out and pay Aaron Rodgers the amount of money they did on his last contract? These are all very unique situations that don't work outside of Green Bay. So Green Bay isn't really a blueprint for team building, but they're certainly successful at it. And they make these rebuilds or reloads look so incredibly easy because they draft really well too. And that's something that Brian Gutekunst has done consistently since he's been there. And then Matt LaFleur has figured out how to use them. I think we now finally know that Matt LaFleur is a really good coach. And it wasn't just Aaron Rodgers for the first few years of his tenure. He went out and took the youngest team in the league to the divisional round of the NFC playoffs with a quarterback in his first year of starting. So I can't say enough about how the Packers are built for sustained success and continue to do so, much to the chagrin of Bears fans and pretty much everybody else in the NFC North and the NFC, because with the addition of Jeff Hafley as their defensive coordinator and Xavier McKinney on the defensive side of the ball, this is a team that looks like it's ready to contend now and for a very long time in the future.
Because the main weaknesses, as you're pointing to there, seem to be, Joe Barry last year. He's the guy who was shown the door, who was the scapegoat for perceived failure. If you can imagine, from a Bears perspective, that failure is only going out in the divisional round. But that's going to be interesting to see how that pans out on the defensive side of the ball, because that's probably been the thing that's held them back.
That's something that I've been talking about a lot this offseason is I'm not worried about Jordan Love because I saw what he was able to do last year. I saw the faith that the Green Bay organization has in him, and for good reason too. This team is going to go the way that the defense goes. Jordan Love did not have a defense he could rely on last season. Even the early ongoings of the season where you expected that there were going to be some bumps in the road for Jordan. I remember the Atlanta game. He had the Packers leading with a double-digit lead going into the fourth quarter, and the defense fell apart. That can't happen for a young guy, so that's partially why Joe Barry was shown the door. Now you bring in a new guy that's going to deploy a new system. It's the first time the Packers will be operating a 4-3 since, I believe, 2015. That's more fluid than ever in today's NFL. Your base system doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but it stresses the safeties. And they went out and got Xavier McKinney. They drafted multiple safeties with their 11 picks they had in this last draft. They have now fortified a defense that has so much talent on that side of the ball, takes up a majority of the salary cap, by the way, if you exclude Jordan Love. And if that defense can be the dependable defense you need them to be, I don't see a weakness on this team right now.
We'll move swiftly on from that, Carmen. I can't contemplate the Packers not having a weakness again.
Sorry.
But over in Minnesota, I mean, whatever about Jordan Love sitting for 4 years, I don't think JJ McCarthy is going to be sitting for that long. But the plan is to have patience. The plan is that Sam Darnold goes in. That's the mantra we've been hearing through the camp. But I guess, to the point you were making about the Packers not having an owner and how that, removes some of the pressure to play your rookie QB. A lot of that also depends on how the start of the season goes. If you're losing games, and probably another factor in this is if Kirk Cousins is winning games in Atlanta, that's piling the pressure on you to do something if you're Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah, I think the Vikings have insulated themselves, and Kwesi in particular have insulated themselves against those kind of higher up pressures, given the fact that they did give Sam Darnold $10 million to start for them this season. That's not nothing, and that's something you can point to and say, all right, I know we have this first round quarterback waiting in the wings. We want to be patient with him. We already paid this guy a lot of money. Why don't we get our money's worth out of Sam Darnold? And I think with Kevin O'Connell in particular, I think he goes completely underrated for the coach that he is. And you can see tangible improvement in the play calling, in the confidence, in the game situations, aspect of being a head coach year after year. And then to see what he did with the rotating cast of quarterbacks after Kirk Cousins went down. I mean, I keep saying it. Kevin O'Connell was playing live action Madden, like play in and play out, where he is telling these quarterbacks who sometimes Josh Dobbs said he didn't even know the names of the receivers he was throwing to in that first game. Kevin O'Connell is the one telling him the checks to make, what to look out for, who he's going to, what this play is, up until that headset cuts off at 15 seconds. So that is an incredible feat. I have all the faith in the world that Kevin O'Connell can develop a young quarterback with a limited amount of reps like JJ McCarthy. But they had the wherewithal as an organization to say, no, we want to be able to take our time. Let's go out and pay a really high quality backup that can kind of keep the ship afloat with all of the talent we have around him. And then if we really feel like JJ McCarthy is ready, or when we feel like he is ready, then he's our answer for the future. But we've seen time and again that if quarterbacks are allowed to ease into the league, the better off they are. You saw that with Patrick Mahomes most famously. So I think that the Vikings are in a really, really good spot. There's not expectations on them this year. Nobody's job is on the line for them this year. This is a crowded field just in their division. So it's really about making sure that JJ McCarthy is the guy. And I think that means that Sam Darnold will have a very, very long leash. And also, I think that he can do well with guys like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson should be healthy relatively early in the season. You now have Aaron Jones in the backfield and a defense in their third year under Brian Flores with two potential double-digit sack guys in Dallas Turner and now Jonathan Grenard from the Texans. So I don't think Minnesota is going to be a train wreck by any stretch of the imagination. And if they can set JJ McCarthy up because they were patient with him, that's going to just benefit this team. And they're also going to be very interesting to follow for the next few years and potentially in contention with the rest of these guys.
It reminds me that a lot of smart people were saying before the draft that probably Minnesota is one of the best landing spots you could possibly be in for a rookie quarterback. And, when you talk about that Josh Dobbs game and regular viewers and listeners to the Irish NFL show will probably think we're on commission for mentioning Josh Dobbs' name because we ran, myself and Brian ran into him in Vegas. There's a long story about this and we fanboyed about it, and we talked to him about that game. I don't think I've ever seen anything as incredible as that in terms of coaching and in real life, as you say, on a sideline. I can't think of too many coaches that could get a quarterback through that situation who literally seemed to have come straight off the plane and didn't even know the names of his offensive line, didn't know the cadence, had to be walked through in the limited amount of time that's available. It was absolutely off the charts.
Yes. And I've been very vocal about, talking about how good of a coach that Kevin O'Connell truly is. And again, this is probably the best situation a rookie quarterback could come into, especially one that was taken in the first round and does have a pedigree coming in. So, I mean, JJ McCarthy had a lot of talent around him in Michigan. That's what makes Michigan. And that's not going to change here. So I'm really excited to see what he can become. And again, under the tutelage of Kevin O'Connell and Josh McCown, who is now his quarterback's coach. I mean, he has two former quarterbacks leading the way for him. And again, a guy in front of him that can keep the ship afloat until he's ready.
Now, if you talk to Chicago's general manager, Ryan Poles, he'll tell you we've put some pretty good talent around Caleb Williams. We like what we've got on the field around him. But one of the really interesting things, and probably not everybody listening has necessarily seen the first episode of Hard Knocks yet, but there's a really interesting scene where Nick Saban, who was previously Matt Eberflus's coach when they were at Toledo and actually gave Eberflus his first coaching start as well in college football, spends a good bit of time with the coach, and they sit down and they talk specifically about what it's going to take for Caleb Williams to succeed. And Nick Saban emphasizes over and over again just how much pressure he's under and how much expectation he's going to face and how he would advise Matt Eberflus to help manage that situation. But that's got to be one of the big questions in Chicago. Firstly is how Eberflus handles that, I suppose, from a coaching perspective. And secondly, how Caleb Williams handles it, because he's a guy who attracts a lot of attention. We'll get to the man bag in a second, which I love, frankly, but he's getting a lot of flack for that on social media. But this is the big question in Chi-Town.
Yeah, it is. And it's nothing new for Caleb Williams either, though. That's the thing. He played in the second largest media market in the country here in LA. And that came with a huge spotlight on him. I mean, Heisman Trophy, finalists, all that stuff, won, 2 years ago. There is so much that Caleb Williams has already dealt with. And then when you add stuff like NIL now on top of this, we're seeing this more and more. And I think this is going to become the norm. Caleb's contract wasn't signed until the 11th hour before training camp. He is a businessman too. He knows how to handle his off the field affairs, which I think is a huge discrepancy usually for guys coming in from college to the pros. You now have to adapt to having all this money and the lifestyle that comes with it and all that kind of stuff. Caleb is a seasoned pro when it comes to that too. He has people in place to handle all of that for him. He is very organized and very intentional with the way that he spends his time. And he knows he's already learned the time management aspect of all of this, which can really, take guys by surprise when they enter the league. And I think NIL has a lot to do with that because these guys are basically pros before they get to the pros. I think if anybody's equipped to handle it, it's Caleb Williams. And it's a good thing because expectations, like you said, are very high in Chicago. They've never had this franchise quarterback. It's been just a painstaking process of promises that go unfulfilled in Chicago every time. And you want to think that this time is different. And the good news in Chicago is I think it is different because Ryan Poles has spent 3 years curating this roster. The Bears have had patience with their front office in setting up an environment that would actually breed success, and not only success in the terms of lightning in a bottle, but success for the long haul, sustained success. And you saw that with the DJ Moore contract that keeps him in Chicago until 2029 or whatever it is. And then you have Rome Odunze, who they drafted alongside Caleb Williams, so he can be there for all of Caleb Williams' first contract. That is stability that this organization has not known pretty much in my lifetime as someone who grew up in Chicago. So I'm very encouraged by all of that. But I also think I probably have a little bit of a wet blanket reputation in Chicago because I also still need to see it. This is not a team that has ever given me reason to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like I said, there have been promises that are unfulfilled when it comes to, you go back to Mitch Trubisky and then Justin Fields, and this hasn't worked out yet. Now this on paper looks like it will, but until I don't want to put the pressure on these guys. I don't want to put the expectations on these guys, especially when they play in such a harsh division where you are having at least 2 playoff teams to contend with. I want to make sure that we are separating team success from Caleb Williams' success. I want to make sure we're separating tangible stats and wins and all that from Caleb Williams. As long as it looks like he's grasping the offense and you can see the improvement. Like if he has the year that, even Jordan Love took a half a season to really, really get going. And it took half a season for Matt LaFleur to open up the playbook. This is an entirely new offense in Chicago under Shane Waldron. Shane Waldron's system also starts out very, very vanilla. I don't think we're going to see all these fun, creative things right in the beginning because you want the guys to get the base concepts down and then start to build. I think that's going to result in some bumps in the road. I think this is maybe going to take a bit of time to get going, but I am pleading with Chicago and Chicago fans to give this offense in particular, but this team patience. Give Caleb Williams patience. I think I'm trying to temper expectations because I don't want people to give up on Caleb Williams if this doesn't go well right away. This usually takes a longer time unless I guess you're CJ Stroud. So I want to make sure that we're not placing undue pressure because it's already a high pressure situation, as Nick Saban was saying to Matt Eberflus. Just wait and see, take it one step at a time. And by next year, if this looks like it's all really, coming into focus and all that kind of stuff, then we can start talking about playoff berths and division titles and playoff runs in general. We can start talking about that next year, but just
you could see even as people work their way through the schedule. So, I talk to a lot of fans and like, Tennessee week 1, that's a win. Then week 2, you're playing CJ Stroud and the Texans, and that's the prove it Caleb game. And it's like every single game suddenly
week
has
2, a prove it game. Like, come on. I really think there is a sweet spot, though, leading up to the Green Bay game in Week 11. And I was on Speak on FS1 the other day talking about how success for the Bears this season, the fun answer for me is just beat the Packers in Week 11 at home. The Bears have lost 12 of 13 at Soldier Field against the Packers. They've been their nemesis for so long. It goes a very long way in Chicago when you can beat the guys in green and gold. So if you can take advantage of the sweet spot leading up to that with some, playing that 4th place schedule, and playing some teams that maybe by then you'll start to gel. Caleb Williams will start to have his confidence, will start to have command of the offense while you're playing some, at least from last year, some lower competition. You can get out of that with a few wins and then come home and beat Green Bay. I think this season will be a success for the Chicago Bears.
I'm going to say, though, if it does turn out to be a success and it does go as well as some Bears fans expect it to go, I think Kelly Eberflus and Matt Eberflus's wife and their 2 daughters are going to be set for life because they're going to be consulting around the league because they will take full credit for the glow up, of course, which Matt Eberflus has been getting huge props for this offseason. Never has a haircut and a new pair of pants done so much for a man.
That, and you can tell that Flus's personality is coming out a little bit more at the podium too, and I think that has helped. I think the confidence he's gained from his new look and his family has translated into him getting a lot better. And I know that he worked really hard this offseason on his own to get better at the podium and make sure that he was more comfortable and was comfortable with showing a little bit of his personality, because I think that was a huge critique of last year where he was trying so hard not to say anything. But in the meantime was kind of robotic about it. And they weren't fun press conferences to be in as someone who sat through a lot of them. So now I appreciate that he has a new sense of confidence. Obviously, everybody is on his side at this point because of how good this team looks on paper. But I think what really goes underrated too, though, is while Matt Eberflus may not have been great at the podium last year, he kept this locker room together through some really bad times, especially early on in the season where it had almost been a calendar year since they had won a game. And he never lost the locker room. All of these guys were 100% behind him. And that is so, so hard to do in this league. So I know that I love that Hard Knocks is giving us the look behind the scenes to see how Matt Eberflus talks to his team, because he's joking with his team. He's like one-liners. He's like the fun, quirky dad, but he's also the fun, quirky dad that lets you hit people. So he's a really fun kind of guy. I've heard from so many players that they love playing for him, and we just never got to see that publicly. So getting to see that now, I hope, again, that the Bears franchise has a little bit of patience with him as well. Another thing in the Hard Knocks, I've never seen a head coach that's on the defensive side of the ball sit in on quarterback meetings. That's not something that is common. That's not, again, something I've ever seen. I think it helps now that Matt Eberflus has a true defensive coordinator to kind of handle some of the defensive duties. But he starts his mornings with the Breakfast Club with the quarterbacks, and he's taken an interest in making sure that Caleb Williams succeeds and is over his shoulder telling him what he's looking at defensively. That should lead to a very well-rounded understanding of the pro game from Caleb Williams. And I appreciate that from Matt Eberflus, because I'm telling you, that's not the norm. It was very interesting to see all of that.
And he clearly took that note from Nick Saban, who said, you got to stand behind the quarterback. You got to see what he sees. And he obviously applied it literally in the next scene through the magic of TV editing, of course. Carmen, as we look ahead to the season, and we'll let you go shortly, I really do appreciate you giving us the time when you're really back at it and things are ramping up at your end. Call it for us. How do you see the division panning out? We're just over a month, or just under a month rather, from the season opener.
I know I've been struggling with this all off season because I think the Lions and the Packers are interchangeable at the top of the division. I just don't know who's going to take it from either of them. I don't know if the Bears can take it from either of them. I think that, again, I want to take it step by step. I just don't want to place those expectations on the Bears. Does that mean that the Bears can't go out and surprise win the division? Absolutely not. I think that's totally within the realm of possibility if this all works out, because their talent matches the level of the Lions and the Packers easily when you look at this on paper. So I still think, though, with the Lions and the Packers being about a year ahead in their own rebuilds or retooling or whatever you want to call it, it's one of their divisions. I still probably think that the Lions edge it out from the Packers, but I think the Packers are almost a lock for the playoffs after what we saw last year and the fact that Jordan got paid and is growing up with his receivers. I think the Bears are going to be right in the mix, though. I would love to see them get to a winning record. I think that would be enough for me when it comes to, all right, this is working. Like, let's keep going, give this another shot. Keep everything in place and make a few minor adjustments. I also see the Vikings. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility they get 7-8 wins. And that's not going to be anywhere close to enough to win the division, obviously, or to make a lot of noise. But 2025, I really think is going to be a very, very interesting year. And I think that the NFC North, if it's not already the toughest division in football, it will be by then.
Okay, Carmen, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us on the Irish NFL show. Obviously, we're lucky enough to welcome the Bears across the Atlantic to this part of the world a little bit later this season. I don't know, maybe we'll see you there when we're in London. But in the meantime, best of luck for the season ahead, and thank you again.
Thanks for having me.